Yellowstone National Park is home to the world's largest supervolcano. It's been dormant for thousands of years. But could it erupt again? And what would happen if it did? What would the devastation be like in terms of death and destruction? And how could you possibly survive an event of this magnitude? Let's find out. Yellowstone National Park is famous for its beauty. There are millions of acres of wilderness with abundant wildlife, including bison, bears, and wolves. There's also Old Faithful, which is really cool. But these days many more people come to the park to gawk at the Grand Prismatic Spring, which is full of colorful bacteria. Yellowstone has so many tourists that it's the most visited national park in the United States. But if people come here to admire nature today, it's only because the area used to be a gigantic lake of magma. That's right. Over hundreds of thousands of years, 3 enormous eruptions created the Yellowstone caldera, a giant hole in the ground that's roughly the size of Los Angeles. And there's still a massive magma chamber beneath the surface just waiting to blow. The U.S. Geological Survey monitors Yellowstone closely for signs of unrest. They keep an eye on steam vents and hot springs, they measure earthquakes and look for changes in the shape of the land. So far they haven't seen any concerning signs. In fact, there's nothing in the data that suggests an eruption is imminent, but the USGS hasn't given us the all clear. They simply say, quote, Yellowstone will erupt again, no one knows when, and when it does blow, things are going to get real ugly. So here's what would happen if the Yellowstone Supervolcano erupted tomorrow, how long you'd have to prepare, and the best ways to survive. The next eruption of Mount Vesuvius was one of the worst disasters in human history. The town of Pompeii was completely obliterated and over 2,000 people were killed. So it's safe to assume that an eruption at Yellowstone would be equally devastating. Except way worse. You see, Mount Vesuvius is considered a small fry compared to Yellowstone. Most volcanoes are stratovolcanoes. These are cone-shaped mountains that form from layers of ash and lava. Stratovolcanoes are dangerous. They often produce pyroclastic flows and have the potential to wipe out entire cities, but compared to supervolcanoes, they're pretty small. Supervolcanoes are nearly 1,000 times larger than stratovolcanoes. They can eject 1,000 cubic kilometers of debris during a single eruption. For reference, Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980 and ejected 12 cubic kilometers of material. A supervolcanic eruption is so violent that it literally creates a new lake of magma beneath the surface. In other words, when Yellowstone blows, we're not talking about a normal volcanic eruption, we're talking about a full-on cataclysm. Now the good news is that it doesn't seem like Yellowstone is due for an eruption anytime soon. The last one happened 640,000 years ago, but in geologic time that's practically yesterday. Eruptions from Yellowstone come in cycles. There's a period of normality followed by a buildup of pressure and then a massive explosion. Scientists don't know exactly what causes these cycles, but they think it has something to do with the magma mixing in the chamber. Every once in a while, the conditions are just right for a super eruption. And when that happens, the surrounding area is screwed. If Yellowstone were to erupt tomorrow, the surrounding states would be utterly devastated. Ash would blot out the sun, plunging the region into darkness. Pyroclastic flows would incinerate everything in their path. Earthquakes would level buildings and hot springs would turn into deadly geysers. People would be caught completely off guard. You see, there are almost no signs that an eruption is coming. Just before the blast there might be an increase in seismic activity, but that could easily be mistaken for an earthquake. There could also be some deformation of the land, but that too could go unnoticed. Even if something did seem amiss, there wouldn't be much time to react. A super eruption is essentially instantaneous. Within a matter of minutes, an unimaginable amount of energy is released. People within hundreds of miles would feel the heat on their faces, they'd hear a roar louder than a hurricane, and when they turned outside they'd see a gigantic plume of ash rising into the sky. There are over 2 million people living within 100 miles of Yellowstone, and all of them would be affected by the initial blast. Some would be incinerated instantly, others would be buried under feet of ash. Those who survived would face another threat, namely deadly lahars. A lahar is a volcanic mudflow. During an eruption, superheated water vaporizes. This creates a torrent of mud that rushes through valleys at terrifying speeds. Lahars can travel for dozens of miles, wiping out everything in their path. Even if you manage to avoid the initial blast, you could be wiped out by a lahar later on. And it's not just people who'd be at risk, entire towns and cities would be leveled. Anything that didn't get incinerated would be buried under ash. The devastation would stretch for hundreds of miles in every direction, but that's just the beginning. You see, when Yellowstone erupts, it doesn't just blow stuff up, it spews ash into the atmosphere. This is known as a tephra. Tephra can stay aloft for weeks or even months, falling back to Earth in the form of volcanic ash. Fine particles can be carried around the entire globe, blocking sunlight and disrupting weather patterns. Within a year after the eruption, half of the United States would experience a volcanic winter. Crops would fail and temperatures would plummet. Eventually the ash would settle and people could start to rebuild, but their lives would never be the same. Volcanic ash is incredibly abrasive. It can wear down your lungs with every breath, it can damage your skin and eyes, and it ruins everything it comes into contact with. You might be able to survive the initial blast and the lahars, but what about the long term? The ash is going to stick around for decades, maybe centuries. Survivors are going to need airtight shelters, respirators, and ways to purify their food and water. But you know what else they'll need? They'll need hope. Hope that someday, life will return to normal. But if Yellowstone erupts again, when will that be? Well, nobody knows. The thing about supervolcanoes is that they don't follow the same rules as regular volcanoes. They don't build their ash and lava in layers. They don't produce the same gases. And they don't behave in predictable ways. It's difficult to study supervolcanoes because there aren't many of them. There are only 12 known supervolcanoes on Earth. And the chances of any one of them erupting in our lifetime are extremely low. Still, it's important to monitor these volcanoes and try to understand their behavior, because when they do erupt, it's going to be catastrophic. It's estimated that the most recent eruption of Yellowstone was 1,000 times larger than the Hiroshima atomic bomb. If it happened today, it would kill millions of people. But there's absolutely nothing we can do to prevent it. We can't stop an earthquake, a landslide, or a volcanic eruption. All we can do is run. Okay, maybe we can't outrun a super eruption, but we can take steps to protect ourselves afterwards. Now watch. Do you have what it takes to survive the end of the world? Or check out another video instead.